transcribed already.
Yes.
What would be fun is feeding that into text to speech with the microphone here.
Yeah.
And get to see like ASCII text feedback.
Okay, by my clock, it's time for us to begin. So let's do that. We have Ben remote and Robert and I are here. Recall that this is being recorded, and I believe Simon agreed to take the notes. To note well, please, before you contribute, make sure you know what your rights, privileges, and responsibilities are. And please remember to treat each other well as well. Or as being said on the moderation discussion list, treat each other with excellence. So remember, if you're in the room, you need to join Metico with the in the room tool, because we will be using that to manage the mic line. And remote participants, please keep your audio and video off unless it's your turn to talk. Document status. We needed a revised ID for provider OOB. I think that was posted today, right?
No, the other one was supposed
The other one was posted today.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, OCSP was, right.
short-lived ones. Sorry.
So we have one waiting in the queue for MISREF, and we're waiting for AD follow-up on 4916 BIS. This is today's agenda. Are there any agenda bashes? Okay, hearing none, we're going to proceed with this. So the first thing up will be short-lived. So I need to stop this, start this.
Oh, hi.
This works.
So this works.
This works
Wow.
once I get them up.
Pretty fancy. So yeah, this was actually just submitted today, but I am not taking the entirety of the blame for this because this was uploaded, as Robert can attest, properly on the ID cutoff time. And I guess I fat fingered or whatever. You did not hit the proper pass through, even though I was logged into the data tracker. And like, so yes, the short-lived 01 was just uploaded today, and that is my fault. What are we talking about here? We're talking about freshness for STIR certificates. I show this slide every time that I talk about either of these documents, just for people that are not following this with the passion that some of us are up here. The problem is that freshness is a little bit different for STIR certs than for regular PKI certs due to this extension that we added to the certs, thing we call TN off list. And the problem with that, especially when we use telephone numbers in this TN off list field of the certificate, is that there's an inherent dynamism of number assignment. Numbers get ported, numbers get changed, people's numbers cycle all the time. And so any given certificate for a telephone number could have like a different freshness implication for it than just an ordinary cert would have. Relying parties want to know when they get a call, is this cert still valid for the calling number in the call that's coming in? And so we've looked at a couple of approaches for this, and we ultimately decided long ago that we were going to push forward two of them. One based on the Online Certificate Status Protocol, OCSP, and the other one on short-lived certs. And I'd say just from a, my sense of the wind at the moment, short-lived certs seems to be the approach people are preferring in the marketplace. We weren't really sure which was going to happen. At least in the US, it looks like short-lived certs have some momentum. So it's probably important to actually bother to get that done and do things like submit these things, on time. Right now, though, OCSP, I believe, is advancing to PubRec. And like, I think that is just a kind of Ben to push the button or someone to push the button thing. So we don't have anything more to do on that. That will soon be on Ori's plate. We've got just a minor adjustment in the new short-lived 01, which has appeared in the data tracker, and it's not a long draft, and the text in it about this is pretty simple. But just to review, last time we talked a lot about the addition of X5C as opposed to the X5U that has traditionally been in STIR passport headers. X5C obviously has the potential to be included by value, the certificates that are actually in a chain. And this is very important for short-lived because we anticipate that the major use case for this is intermediate certificate authorities that are issuing an entity certs. We call this delegation in STIR. And this is the way that, for example, enterprises or non-carrier entities in US STIR Shaken will be able to participate more fully in the ecosystem. So it's like kind of important we get this right. And we talked about this last time. We have elevated X5C to a must and indeed to a must use. However, we also talked a bit about if you're doing X5C, should you also put in an X5U for backwards compatibility? Because there are going to be STIR Shaken implementations that do not support X5C, probably for some time now, because a lot of these things got baked a while ago and vendors going to have some time coming up to this. You know, and we talked about last time and people were like, it should be a must for both. And as I was just writing the 01, I could not bring myself to do that. I can bring myself to say that it is a may for having a redundant X5U, but like, you know, I think if we want anybody who implements this specification and understands short-lived and things like that is going to understand X5C because it's a must in this, right? And like, I'm still a bit on the fence for having X5U be a redundant X5U be a must, given that we're now saying it is a must for X5C. So if anybody here or online would like to argue with me about this, I'm happy to hear it. You know, I think last time I was halfway convinced that we needed to have the redundant be must for that, but I could not bring myself to make that modification this time. Would anyone like to go to bat for a must for a redundant X5U? I don't know who's playing the home game today. I don't have the Jabber chat in front of me, but I know we're at an inconvenient time zone for a lot of the people that usually would be complaining about this.
One in particular.
Chris is in the
Yeah,
queue.
Chris, thank you.
I forget what I said in the last meeting, but I sort of agree with you, actually. I think long-term, this is what makes the most sense.
Yeah.
Short-term, I think people are worried about breaking verification service and things like that, but I don't know. I think this is the right thing long-term, so I'm okay with it.
Yeah, I mean, if you like don't support like having a chain certificate in there anyway, which you won't unless you're supporting this, then like, you know, the X5U that you get that has a chain certificate in it might not be all that helpful for you, right? And unfortunately, there's a lot of really hard-coded stuff around these edges. So we can take this back to the list and confirm this consensus on the list, but that's what I have in here. We also talked a bit about abbreviating the certificate chain. Oh, sorry, Robert.
Just if it jogs anyone's memory, what the notes from the last meeting captured was that the X5U was for backwards compatibility.
Yeah, that's what I
if you had
said. Yeah.
anything deployed, right?
Yep. But my point is just like, but if you are not, if you don't support chains for this anyway, for short-lived, which I'm not sure anybody does, right? In these existing implementations, having an X5U that has a chain in it might not be all that helpful.
I think the other thing to justify it is as a JWT library, you should be implementing it that it supports
should.
any of these things anyway. So
You should. I mean, but I fear a lot of people just cut corners, right? And don't actually have a full JOT library and instead just like have some hard-coded thing that only supports these fields, right? So the second thing we discussed then was shortening the certification chain, I should say, to exclude the root cert. I've introduced that as a may. We are certainly not going to require that you do it. If some other body that defines national standards, for example, ATIS, decides that they would like to require this, that's fine, but I do not believe that the IETF's version of this needs to require it. Now, moreover, the more radical prospect that beyond excluding the root cert, you might also want to exclude the intermediate cert, the cert of what they call in Shaken the SCA. that was floated last time, so that basically all you get is the EE cert, and like you just have to know what both the intermediate and the root are to put this together. The more I thought about that, the more I was just like, nah. I think I want that intermediate CA to be present in any X5C that we're issuing for this. Russ, any thoughts?
So I'll just observe that in TLS, they have a must to exclude the root cert
Okay.
because the root cert is in your trust store. And so if you don't have it, you can't validate the path anyway.
Yeah. Which makes a lot of sense. And the same is true in Shaken. I'm not sure
Correct.
it's true in every national deployment. Well, I guess
Got to be.
in France it is because they only have one, because they built this all monolithic. In Brazil, they also only have one. So yeah, I mean, I don't know if I want to take it to a must. You must exclude the root cert. What I have is that excluding it is optional, though it may be required in some national deployments.
How about should exclude the root cert?
Should. Okay, I can elevate to should before we send this on. But I mean, to make a long story short, if there's no other comment, oh, there is. Simon, sorry.
Has there been any consideration for doing both X5U and X5C? So having the X5C actually not be a chain, but just the thing that's likely to change, the delegate certificate, and using the X5U then for sort of common things that are used in multiple places.
I mean, I think our thinking was that the X5U and the X5C should have identical content, and if they didn't, there could be mischief. But I mean, the questions I was asking last time about this, a lot of them were, well, what if you've got like some weird certification path where there's like potentially multiple intermediaries that you could go through to get back to a root that you trust, and like how you might infer that? I mean, I know that there's what the AKID, is that the name of the field? No, I'm forgetting my certs. Yes. Like, there are things that tell you like what the cert up your certification path is supposed to be.
Correct.
But I'm always worried about mischief. I don't know this as well as you guys do. So I mean, having the X5U have everything you need if you want to bother to go get it, and then just having X5C have the leaf, the identity cert. I guess it's a possibility. We don't really stipulate actually that the contents of the X5C and X5U need to be identical in the draft at the moment. I just kind of assumed that they would. But that's a possibility. That's not crazy.
Yeah, I think the goal would be trying to get the balance between size of passports versus the amount you need to download.
Yeah.
You need to download.
Because like it's true. If you have a full cert chain with 3 or potentially 4 certs in it in X5C, like that's big.
Yeah.
And some implementations I know are going to barf on it.
Cool. Thanks.
Chris? So, Jeff?
So 2 things. I've been watching a lot of certs, and about 50% of them have the root cert attached to them. So there are many that don't have the root cert attached, but yeah, without it, and the validation works the same because the root signs itself. So if you're walking the validation, it works beautifully still with it there. Getting rid of the intermediates, though, you can't prove or I don't know how you prove the chain without having all the intermediates. So if you just showed up with an entity cert, there's very little way to tie it to the root.
Well, I mean, you would have to have, I mean, the AKID or whatever it is, then would point you to that intermediary cert. It's presuming that you already have it, right? That you already cached it or something. And it in turn would have an AKID that points up to the root it came from. Am I getting this right, Sean and Russ? Am I?
Well, you'd use the SKI.
Oh, it's the SK, yes. It's not, yeah, the A is down, the S is up, right?
Right.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, mine like a sieve. Yeah, so in other words, there is basically a unique identifier for the cert that that's supposed to be above you in the chain.
Right.
And so like, this is just presuming if you went down to solely end entity, that you already have cached both the intermediate and the root. You certainly have the root cached already, right? The question is just, do you have the intermediate cached? And
For the first time, you don't.
The first time you don't. So this is kind of what Simon was getting at. It's like, maybe what we should do is just send EE and X5C. And like, if turns out you need the thing that the SKID points to, like, then you can just go get that by hitting the X5U and dereferencing that URL, and then you'll get the rest.
So you're saying the X5U could be the full chain and the X5C just be the entity?
Well, I mean, I think it was,
Just the end entity.
yeah, the X5C is just the end entity. And I think what Simon was proposing was that if you dereference the X5U, you would get the root and the intermediate with it. I mean, I'm not completely sold that that's like something
You
I
still
would.
don't need the root though.
You still don't need the root. It's true. You should, if you, there's no implementation, national implementation I'm aware of in which anybody does not have the roots cached. That's a verification service. It's required in Shaken. They broadcast this down from the policy administrator effectively to every verification service in Shaken. This is the set of like, the middle things that you can trust. Yeah, Chris.
I was just going to say, I'm not a fan of that. So it's not standard
Yeah,
jot. and,
yeah, I know.
It would be our own little thing. So
I'd rather, yeah. I mean, I'm not that concerned about having both the intermediate CA and the end entity cert be in X5C. Yes, it's bytes, but they're bytes, and we can live with it. At least most sane implementation should be able to handle that. Okay, so given that, what is my takeaway from this? Russ, you want me to bring it to a should to exclude the root cert?
I would like that.
Okay, so we'll take that, Simon, as I think the only action item here. Maybe we'll add a little more descriptive text kind of about the interplay of X5C and X5U in these cases, but probably nothing normative.
Is there anything else that needs done to this document?
Nope.
Before we get to work group last call?
No, there is not. As
Okay.
my next slide says, it's probably good for a last call. If we're good with the X5U support, okay, we're gonna do a should on the end entity thing. I'm sorry, should on the exclusion of the root cert, and then we're shipping it.
How long
shipping
will
it
we
off
see
to
the
mail.
document before Bangkok?
Why don't I try to do it today?
Oh, that'd be awesome.
Okay. All right. Maybe not today, but like tomorrow morning. Okay, but that's it, man. I'm sad because again, OCSP is already going to pub rec, and so these are baked from my perspective. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, transparency is next. I don't see transparency slides. Oh, there it is. You did, because you put them together.
yes, so I'm going to present these sort of together, but I'll do transparency first. I figured we have some time today, so I'm giving a more comprehensive slide presentation than I usually do. Hopefully that's a good thing. Thank you. Yeah, I love that. I love that picture because like that's basically what I'm here to talk about. That we have a bunch of policies, but we have no way to control them. How do we get some control over these things? So I probably don't have to explain it here, but we established the call authentication protocol delivering passports, and that's in the network, and that's all good, and we should probably celebrate that as an industry. That that was a big thing. But as folks might know, we are having trouble with attestation as a trust mechanism in general. How do we get beyond that? So as I've talked about before, certificate transparency, VESPR framework are two things I believe the industry could work on as a framework for establishing more about the actual entity behind the telephone number and proving the association with the telephone number and things I will go through more throughout this presentation. So it's sort of like the other half of STIR, moving from proving like that the telephone number is a network identifier that's used through the call to actually attempting to do something around user identities, or at least telephone identity. Enabling transparency is really interesting thing I'll talk more about, but making sure that we're including privacy and consent to make things trusted. I want to talk a little bit about trust and transparency because it's a term I've been using a lot. They're sort of complementary and contradictory concepts because you have to sort of think about the two sides of things here. You're going to trust me if I'm transparent about myself, but you don't trust me if I'm transparent about your information without your consent to share it. And that's sort of the two sides of some of the concepts we need to talk about as part of this framework. It's really establishing explicit control over information sharing, whether it's the ecosystem sharing that information or the entities themselves. So really transparency, both the sort of IETF definition we talk about transparency and just the more transparency definition of being transparent in the ecosystem is an important thing that I believe leads to trust as well as privacy and consent. So controlling the transparency, controlling privacy, controlling disclosure, and controlling consent. So certificate transparency, as I've described before, it's something that the web world has adopted for web domains, making sure that when certificates are issued, there's transparency logs that are used to make a public declaration that that's happened, and is a mechanism to detect when there's either intentional or unintentional unauthorized certificates being issued. Most of the browsers enforce that. They have policies that do that today, so it's being used as we speak. But we're here to talk about how CT works with STI certificates. When a certificate is issued, it's submitted to one or more CT logs. The log issues a SCT receipt as proof that it was logged. And over time, the transparency logs can be monitored. And at the endpoint that needs to verify that or trust that you've been transparent about the generation of the issuance of the certificate, you can look at the SCT within the certificate itself. So the actors involved here are the CAs that have to implement submission to transparency logs and the integration of the SCTs into the certificate, the monitors that make sure that no one's in the ecosystem misissuing certificates. There's an auditor role for verifying that the log is consistent and correct. And then relevant to STIR, the verification service then, instead of just verifying the passport signature and things like that, they also look to make sure that there's a transparency receipt in the certificate itself. So that was sort of a misconception at the last meeting that verification services would have to go to a transparency log and do an additional query. That's not necessary. It should be all baked into the certificate. So, you know, in the STIR ecosystem, we have telephone numbers. In the web world, they have domain names. Both are globally unique. We want to avoid unauthorized usage or misissuance. And we can use CT logs and CT in general to do that. Did you have a question?
We actually go back. I'm sorry, this is John Peterson. Can we go back one more? So this is the part that I guess I want to understand.
Mhm.
So if the inclusion, if what is included with the passport that gets sent to verification services is just the signed certificate timestamp, right? It's not the signed certificate timestamp that alone gives you access to whether the monitor that monitors these logs from misused certificates knows that, or that it's been audited, or even that it was submitted to a log at all, right? That it went to CT at all. It's just the thing that is an input to the log. So in what so the verification service that doesn't need to look at the ledger to ascertain
Right.
any information that isn't in, beyond the SET, I don't understand like how it gets the benefit of any of the things above that.
So it's actually when the certificate gets created, it's a pre-certificate. It gets submitted to the log. It gets a receipt back, and then that receipt gets
I see.
integrated into
Okay.
the
So
certificate itself.
there's a significant actually from
so
the log.
Yeah,
that
the
is in
transport
that.
of the receipt is actually the certificate itself.
Okay. And
So actually,
presumably
verification doesn't change.
the
at all.
monitors and auditors then
They're
remove
asynchronous.
those things or invalidate it if it was in fact a misissued certificate at some point.
Correct. Like you as an interested party,
And
know,
how
you
does the
care about,
verification service learn that that happened if you get back from the log?
you trust that the ecosystem is monitoring and that cleanup is happening. Basically, if you see somebody that's sitting on your SPC or your telephone number, then we would have industry procedures to make sure that that certificate is invalidated or
but
revoked.
the
or
information that monitors and auditors received in this is not embedded in the SCT, correct? So like, the verification service would learn that through some other channel.
From the certificate.
No, it can't be from the certificate because
Yeah.
after the certificate is issued is when monitors and auditors see that it was right.
Ori's going to answer this.
Yeah,
Okay.
let Ori.
No, he's not. Okay.
Hi, Ori Steele, wearing no hat. I mean, this slide here is basically just like 6962, but for non-web PKI certs, right? Like you're
Pretty
not
much.
you're not
pretty much.
doing anything else. You're just saying like
Right.
RFC 6962 was deployed.
Yeah.
9162 tried to make it better, wasn't deployed,
Right.
and like it's just regular certs 6962. That's
Right.
all that this is.
Yes, correct.
All right, and
Actually, just to be precise, we're more opinionated where we only say that we should support the pre-cert flow and not the out of band sending a receipt flow.
which is just opinionation within 6962, not
Exactly.
changes to 6962.
Exactly. Yes.
And slightly reaching for my hat. Later on, is it like, well, I guess.
Well, I guess the other thing we define, we do define some APIs that.
All right. Well,
But
thanks.
So the part, John, for your question is the extension in the certificate tells you where in the log it is if you want to go check it.
Yeah. The point I was making is just that means you have to go check.
Yeah.
And when you said
that's
this
what the
does not
monitor does.
require you to make any other dip from the verification service, that was
Right.
the part I was pushing on. I don't see how that could be possible.
The monitor does that.
and
Not-
And then the
Yeah,
monitor broadcasts this
if you-
information to every verification service, or what happens?
no. If you get, well, in a different mechanism, you would probably revoke the cert that
Correct.
was misissued, and then.
And then you would have the CRL that you download.
Correct.
Right.
PA
Yeah.
would be the thing that gets you that in
Exactly.
the shaking
Right.
ecosystem. Okay.
Exactly.
I'm just this was my dissonance. There's no free
Yes.
lunch.
No, that's-
somewhere.
No, there's
No,
no
it's-
free lunch.
Steps 2 and 3 have to be integrated into this in the
It's a great-
verification
no.
services flow. However that happens, it's out of band of the flow you're describing here.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, that was a great question. Thank you. Because I'm not sure I had thought to that degree, but yeah, that makes sense. Where was I? I think I was on this slide. So actually, this slide sort of talks to the topic that you were just talking about. It isn't it isn't a real-time verification. It isn't a real-time query to any logs. It's just you're doing all this stuff before the call. Hopefully, the misissuance gets caught in a relatively short amount of time, but you can revoke the cert. Yeah, I think we covered all of that. Just to restate it, we think that SPC certs and TN delegate certificates are valid here. Right now, there's not a ton of incentive to spoof an SPC, but there may be a day that may be a thing, especially with some of the things that the FCC just came out with that are really enforcing that everybody has to sign, everybody has to have an OCN that's signing. So, so the tougher the constraints get there may be more incentive to try to misissue an SPC intentionally. TNs, hopefully that's obvious to everyone. Like that's something we probably, this would be a very useful mechanism to monitor. So basically, I'm restating what we said before. Instead of trying to actually, the change that we made on this rev of the document was to sort of take the advice of making it self-contained. It references 6962 and adopts all the concepts, but it's actually not dependent on it. And talks specifically, is very opinionated about how we do CT for this draft. Like I said, it focuses on the pre-certificate flow rather than any transmission of SETs separate from the certificate. And it does provide a specific set of APIs. So, but those are more just to have something where you have the specific monitor API and other things that are useful for the ecosystem. Any more questions specific to certificate transparency? I think it's relatively straightforward. I think we're really just proposing to adopt something that seems to be a useful tool, especially before it potentially becomes a problem. Having that tool available, I think, would be a good idea. Okay, I'll move into Vesper. As we were talking before, Vesper, to continue the James Bond theme. It's actually his favorite martini drink. So, so Vesper, verified STI persona. Looking at this as an extension to the STIR architecture, really focused on representing vetted identities, information related to telephone numbers, all the things we've been sort of talking about in terms of rich call data, but adding some new potential information to think about, like consent. I think it would be extensible to incorporate other telephone number identity related information in the future. No reason we couldn't do that, but we'll get into the details and maybe that'll become more clear. The problem statement basically is right now we're relying on self-assertion of information by the party signing the call. How do we move, basically the industry discussion over the past 2 or 3 years has been about KYC vetting. Some of the recommendations coming out of the call authentication trust anchor working group in NANCI, the FCC NANCI, have been all about establishing best practices for that. But I think it's time to have something concrete that we can talk about where we can represent these things more formally in a protocol. Next slide. So Vesper proposes a number of ecosystem actors. And, the names are probably up for debate, but these are the names I came up with for now. Subject entity, that is the entity that is associated with the number assignment. So the entity that's associated to the telephone number and also has other information that it's associated with. Notary agent. So Vesper does use similar transparency techniques, probably more inspired by SCIT and things like that than certificate transparency. So I gave the name notary agent as something that essentially notarizes information that's being claimed. There, we define something called a claim graph, and has the notion of issuing transparency receipts. But there's a lot more detail there that I'll go into. I'm defining something called claim agents. So this gets to the sort of extensible part of the protocol where you have different sets of information that are being claimed about the subject entity. Those are created using SDJWT is the proposal. So you can have selective disclosure, zero knowledge proof, all those great things that form the privacy properties that we want. So, you know, I may be vetted as an entity that includes my physical address and some other information that I don't necessarily want to disclose to everyone in the ecosystem. But that might be important for potentially law enforcement to have in terms of enforcement. John.
Yeah, John Peterson. So who do you want to disclose that to? In the
That's
context
why
of placing a telephone call?
That's why I brought up law enforcement as the probably one that you would want to disclose that information to. Otherwise, probably, well,
I mean,
you may want
you mean
to
in lieu
disclose
of
your physical address.
You mean in lieu of a like PSAP using PID-Flow to ascertain your geographic location, or what do you mean by that? What law enforcement agent would you disclose your address to in your
Oh,
a telephone
I
call?
mean, like you're doing bad calls and you didn't disclose your physical address and vetting information to the end caller, but there's a flow for if a subpoena is given, that you can get that information from the claim agent that has validated that information. That's the idea, at least.
Okay.
I can.
Okay.
If it still doesn't make sense at the end, we can chat more about it.
Well, it's an unusual use case that, like, you know, what we're doing with this is providing selective disclosure of information about consumers that would potentially be used by law enforcement agents without their consent.
It's a topic we can definitely.
Without the consumer's consent, I presume.
We can talk about that. I understand the privacy implications there.
Can you give me another example of something that you would selectively disclose about the consumer other than their physical address?
Well, in general, selective disclosure would happen by the consumer themselves.
Right.
This is how I want to present myself based on this rich call data or whatever.
But in what case would I want that to be selective? Rich call data is disclosure.
Selective meaning
I want to disclose it to Russ, but not to Robert.
Right.
In what case is that possible for rich call data?
You have different presentations, so
okay.
I want to be anonymous.
I'm on a party
I want to be anonymous to Russ, but I want to give a logo and a name to Robert. Is one example.
And consumers are going to have an interface, presumably on their devices, that would let them make that decision on a per party they call basis.
That could be the case. I'm thinking more enterprise businesses doing these things initially.
Okay.
But nothing to say consumers couldn't be enabled over time if we think we can get there.
Okay.
But I'm also thinking selective disclosure could also be selecting different profiles of what my logo looks like or my name looks like or other things like that. And I've pre-vetted all of those different things. I think we have a few people in the queue. Rob?
Hi, I think that one other case that we could consider, and this is probably more futuristic thinking or use case, but for example, if I am calling on behalf of my mom to some medical provider, that there could be potential of disclosing, hey, I actually signed the permission to like get information about her in medical information and that type of stuff, which is that's not a possibility. So there could be some integrations of that level. Like I have
I'm
a
sorry, you're
claim.
talking about a HIPAA level integration for passports? Because that, again,
No,
that is
no,
literally
no,
the
not
most sensitive.
necessarily. It could be any. It could be any. Like think of it in terms of like even ID token or something of that nature, saying, "I am in your system, and that's who I really am. I'm proving myself to you that that's who I am, and here's additional claims that you may want to know." But your system would have that information, not HIPAA and all that stuff. But now, if I'm making a phone call to you and I'm just talking, and they ask me, "Hey, are you really?" her son, and your name is Rob, and all this, they just getting a verbal of check, nothing more. But if you could pass in some of the KYC information, for example, that is signed.
Wow. So, I mean, you're suggesting that the kind of information that vetting agents would be ascertaining are things like familial relationships between
No,
the
no,
ordinary
identity,
controllers of
just
different
identity.
numbers?
Just identity.
I think
I
think
am.
it's more of
KYC.
a brainstorming exercise, but
No,
obviously policies
well,
would
I
need
mean,
to be
but
followed.
yeah, as I said, I don't think there is any HIPAA or anything. That's a use case specific thing for the business. Business just wants to know who I really am.
I think he was referring to, you said you were calling the doctor, so
Yeah, you said you're
Ma-
calling a
maybe-
doctor.
maybe
and
that's
because
a
I'm your
bad-
son, I should have access to my mother's benefit. And trust me, HIPAA disallows that.
No,
Like, yeah.
no.
Even if,
It's
but I
I'm
don't see
calling
the
the
point
doctor,
of doing
and
that.
they don't know who I am, because all they get is my number, right, and my voice, and that's it, right?
Okay, so
Now they have like someone vetted me.
let me up level a little,
Yeah.
because I mean, the meta comment I'm making here is that what we've tried to achieve with STIR and passports, when we started, if you look at the original STIR threat model, right,
Mhm.
there were a set of specific threats that we were attempting to defeat with this. And obviously, I think rich call data serves a purpose in that it gives consumers greater trust, particularly when an enterprise brand is calling you. It encourages you to pick up the phone because you have a greater level of assurance. And that is really what we've been trying to create here.
Mhm.
When I hear about these kinds of features, I get a little worried, to be honest, about where Passport is going. I understand why RCD is there. Chris, can you give me like a use case for this? I'll understand. Like for what specific like threat that we consider to be a STIR threat, this information is going to help us defeat.
I think this is an attempt to separate the vetting of rich call data or other types of information and provide a storage. So if we go to the last item there, Vesper Wallet, the idea is that you have all of these different presentations that you've pre-vetted. Let's go to, I'd rather do the enterprise use case of like, I'm Home Depot and, I have various forms of logos or calling names or whatever, and I'm disclosing. Sure. Does that make sense, or?
I do understand that.
Yeah, okay.
It doesn't require any of these things here to do that, right? Like manages consent claims. John Peterson, I'm not going to bother going back in the queue. It takes me forever to get out of it. Like none of those require consent claims or something like that, though, right? And the consent claims are where I start to get worried. When I see these things, I'm like, selective disclosure means I need to be understanding. I need to anticipate to whom this call is likely to be delivered, and on the basis of that, make a consent decision.
All right, let me try to back up a sec, because part of the idea here is that rather than the verifier just inherently trusting that you did somebody did the vetting and all that stuff happened, there's actually the claim agent that's issuing the SDJOT that carries that information is formalizing themselves as the vetter, so that the verifier knows, I know who to talk to. I know who I'm staking my decision to trust that information on, and that's formalized in the signature of that token.
No problem. Exactly like we did it for third-party RCD, right? Where there's an IS, and it tells you who it is that issued it, and you trust that person, and you don't. That part I totally get.
Yeah.
The rest, the selective disclosure, certainly right to use is a little complicated too. We'll talk about that, I
Sure.
guess. But I'm just concerned about the scope of KYC going beyond merely, I know this business owns this number, into this much more complicated realm of, I know this person is like, this is their mother, right? And like, I know I don't want to disclose that to just
yeah.
everyone, but like, that's when I start to get real nervous about this.
Sure, and those are more policy decisions. We're just defining the tools. It can be as basic or as complex as we want. I think that was just sort of a futuristic example, potentially, if this all works correctly. Consent, I think, it's a topic to talk about, like TCPA, like how do you prove that on a call level that I got consent to actually call you? And how can I prove that? I think there's other consent things, like we're talking about AI, consent for AI and other things like that.
Yeah. I mean, for TCPA in particular, and again, we're talking about some extremely US specific use cases, but we'll continue to entertain this.
Mhm.
I mean, the things that govern that, and that, for example, how many call attempts have been made by this particular enterprise to this particular person over a given time frame.
Mhm.
I mean, if that's information you're effectively embedding in the passport. And if so, like
No.
based on the fact that some third-party entity is presumably monitoring the behavior of this enterprise and tallying the number of times because
I-
otherwise, what information would you put in there that's
Consent
useful?
isn't about how many calls you've made. It's about
No, that's what the
whether
TCPA
whether
requires.
whether the destination number, the person behind the destination number, has given you permission to place a call
TCPA is
to them.
much more complicated than that.
Well,
actually. Like
I'm just
TCPA
saying.
is about things like how many times you're allowed to contact this person within it. My point is a verification services job. If it becomes to enforce things about TCPA like that,
Mhm.
we're going to get into a very strange realm with what we think passports do.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I think we're talking about mechanisms versus policies and how the policies are enforced, but maybe that is the surface that we're getting to, that we're trying to have a protocol that formalizes how those things are represented in the call, so that the verification service does a simple check and can trust that whatever is being passed has been pre-vetted or validated, or comes from, in the case of consent, comes from the actual caller, called party in themselves.
Right. Ori Steele. I just, how many more slides are there on?
We're about halfway.
Yeah.
Okay. I think what I'm going to ask is, like, let's get through these slides, and then I want to come back to the mic. I want to talk about the 2 documents.
Sure.
And then I want to talk about your charter.
What was the last thing you said?
And I want to talk about the charter.
Oh, right. Yes, understood.
Or not.
Or not. Okay. So yes, so that's just a different picture. So this is the high level workflow. Trying to decide if we want to go through this in detail or not. Maybe I can just try to do it fairly quickly. Basically, there is a opinionated thing where you need to get vetted as an entity first. So making sure that you exist as either a human or a business entity, and that sets up the basis for what other claims are going to be made against. So it also sets up the notary agent with a particular association with that entity, so that any future transparency receipts and claim graph entries are put there. obtaining the right to use the telephone number is obviously an important, probably second step. That can be associated with a TNSP or a REST org that is assigning the number. They probably likely would be the claim agent that would enable that. Right to use in general and association with assigned numbers is also a problem that we may use this as a mechanism to solve as well. And using potentially a Vesper token independent of passports in terms of calls might be an interesting property of Vesper as well. And then I use rich call data as another example. So, rich call data is a claim, other claims can come. But basically the notary agent exists to record these transactions, not record the information in the claims, just record them as transactions, either with hashes, or there's an additional feature where maybe you do want to publicly claim. Maybe I do, as Home Depot, want to say this is my telephone number, and I want to make sure nobody else claims the calling name Home Depot or the logo that looks like the Home Depot logo. So there's the opportunity to do that type of public transparency ecosystem vetting, which would enhance trust as well. And then at the end, the SC stores all these claims in a digital wallet that allows them to create selectively disclosed presentations like per call or per message or whatever. So deciding how do I want to represent myself to the called party. Is that good? The Vesper claims, I've already talked a little bit about this, but each claim essentially is associated with those categories or types. We're using SDJOTs as the mechanism. Basically, each claim is an SDJOT that then gets wrapped by a passport JOT at the high level and is signed. I talked a little bit already about the claims being submitted as hashes, but public or private disclosure can, in particular with telephone numbers, your association with a telephone number, even if you're anonymously associated with that, is an important part of making sure there isn't replication within the Vesper set of tokens. We sort of talked through this a little bit. Each of the different claim agents, the intent is to make it extensible if there's any other data types that might be useful for these use cases. I think these are probably pretty well understood. Everything's signed as with the claim agents as issuers. So the verifier, if they want to know who the claim agent is, they can look at that. It sort of goes back to the enforcement part of if law enforcement gets a Vesper token from a illegitimate call, they can look at who all the claim agent issuers are and potentially get more information about who is behind that call. That's just an idea. We can have the discussion on whether that's a relevant feature. I think there's potential for good things there in terms of quick enforcement and traceback type of scenarios. At the end of the day, the verification service validates the parent passport as well as each of the SDJOTs corresponding each claim within that passport and the corresponding transparency receipts that it got from the notary service. Is that it?
No, I moved my mouse out of the, it dropped me.
Sure.
It dropped me. Working now?
Yes. The notary agent, it's essentially a transparency service with a graph of all of the claims that were made. So it's really just sort of in the using the philosophy of SCIT and supply chain things. It's connecting the dots through hashes of all the claims and the claim agents and the subject entities that are associated with those claims to prove that that actually transaction actually happened, not necessarily to disclose any information, unless people want to make a public declaration of their information. So a couple of different themes there that we're incorporating. I just explained the claim graph and the transparency log. Hopefully, if you have more questions, we can go through that. So got a bunch of feedback on the first draft. That was discussed at recent industry events, got some good feedback. And 2 was just basically a large cleanup of the language and readability and things like that, just to let people know. So now's when Ori can come up and we can have that discussion.
I'll use my AD privilege to not put myself in mute echo.
You were never taken out.
Oh, well,
He is now.
I'm Ori Steele. Let me do the first part without a hat. So, basically, in STIR, you have a part of this that's certificates and innovation we've done in the IETF around certificates and applying that innovation. And you've lessons learned from how that innovation rollout has gone for certificate transparency, the cost to operate them, who chooses to operate them, how they're used, and in particular, the threat model they were designed to solve, and how well have they addressed those threats. So we have it's been some time since certificate transparency was deployed. So we have information around that part, and you've got a part of this where you're sort of asserting the same kinds of threats exist for your certificates, and the same kind of approach would be effective.
Right.
I'm not an expert on telephony to be able to evaluate that criteria, but I just want to make sure I understand that certificate part of the space you're talking about. And then the other part is you have JSON Web Tokens as part of STIR.
Right.
And STJOT is basically just JSON Web Tokens, but with instead of a two-party model where issuer signs something and the verifier sees everything, it's a three-party model where there's this new party in between that can decide how much the verifier is going to see.
Right.
And I don't fully understand, probably should understand more exactly the token model that you have. But if you don't have 3 parties right now, adding a 3-party model into STIR is going to be like a big problem potentially. Could be really difficult. I don't really know the details. In some of your use case framing around Vesper, I hear maybe new use cases kind of coming up around that. So with individual contributor hat on, that, those are maybe interesting use cases. Maybe a lot of folks here are excited to explore them. Now I'm going to put on area director hat.
Sure.
As I read the charter today, there is a framing around solving identity issues and problems. And it's sort of my feeling that you've effectively solved them, and that it's STIR is sort of being deployed. And then the changes to the charter that I can see in recent history removed concrete milestones and sort of said, we'll look at extensions. And if I squint at these, I could maybe bring myself to call them an extension, but I'm really struggling to see them as extensions, wearing my area director hat. So I think the thing that I would like to sort of hear from other folks, in the room, the group, is like, are these maybe the beginnings of some concrete milestones that we might add to a redone charter? We add back some milestones. We say, these are the kinds of extensions the group wants to go after. And I'm, Chair, as I'm looking to you to sort of weigh in on this part of the discussion. And if that's the case, then I think let's have that conversation around what extensions are in scope for the charter. I don't like particularly the current charter framing around we'll kind of work on extensions, and the last update to the charter that I can see was removing concrete ones. So I want to fix that. I think it's going to be good for everybody. Those are my remarks for now.
Yeah. I think broadly, Vesper is a new passport extension. Obviously, I'm not going to deny that it's a pretty large one, but at the end of the day, it technically is a new passport extension. To just quickly address your three-party model thing. So basically before, the called party and the calling party and the called party were the two parties. Now we're adding this claim agent / vetting / somebody that validates your information as the third party issuer.
Do you want to get Ben to jump the queue to address the charter framing from the chair's perspective, or do you want to do it?
I think Ben's in line to do it.
Oh, let him jump the queue.
Okay.
Move them up to the front.
Ben, you want to go next, please?
Okay, I just assumed Robert was here for the same reason, but I'll go. The chairs had a brief email conversation right before this meeting about, would have been in person, but I'm not there, about whether this was in scope of the charter, and at the time decided that paragraph on extensions covered it. Now, I'm going to speak as an individual here. This is not chair consensus. After going back and rereading it, I think that the charter does cover extensions that involve how we present rich data to the callee, but I'm not sure there's anything in our charter that covers this bit about claim agents and how information is vetted prior to the call. To me, it seems like that's kind of a bigger push beyond just what we already have with, say, certificate authorities, and probably should. I think it makes sense to do it in STIR, but I think that probably requires a little bit of refinement to the charter to fit that, and it's a big thing. And the other chairs weren't expecting me to say that, because just earlier I said I thought this was all in charter.
That's okay. Robert?
This is Robert Sparks. The charter reframing, I think, is probably appropriate, and I don't want to go artists to do it. Entered the queue to ask a question with the chair hat off. If you could page back to the slide that had the ladder diagram. So I'm looking at this requests TN from RTUCA and receives a TN. This is a minting of a telephone number.
Yeah, so this is
I
a very...
pull my shiny new phone out of a box that I got from some service provider, and some dance happens on the back end, and I get one of these Vesper things that claims, oh, I'm using my shiny new phone. And maybe I didn't get a chance to consent to that.
Yeah, so I will totally admit this is a very high level, very hand wavy. We definitely want to put all the details in there for what that would be, but yes, it's not just a single transaction that happens there, and was not intended to be.
Okay, John Peterson, putting on my helpful John Peterson hat, hopefully. So like, I understand why you want to do this all as a singular framework that'll then just have this extensibility and this applicability to this variety of potential use cases.
Mhm.
But I think I would counsel to break it up, actually.
Mhm.
In part, again, because things like right to use claim, I think that's something that we need anyway. And in
Mhm.
fact, if you look at like the stuff in Mimi that I was poking out there, the Mimi ID prover, you know, one of the first things I figured out when we started looking at that was that, in fact, it's not so much the right to use a number for a consumer, it's a right to use a number for the consumer on a particular platform. And that
Mhm.
there needs to be like a three-way handshake to do that. And there are a variety of reasons why I think I can argue very successfully that is the right way to frame that problem. But I think that should be framed as a kind of separate problem from all the rest of this,
Mhm.
for the simple reason that all the other things that this is about don't apply to that question. I think any usage that we envision of delegate certificates where there's an enterprise or something that should be able to do this should be able to have a way of proving that they're entitled to use that telephone number,
Right.
period. And
Yeah.
like, I think that's a separable problem from the rest of this. The rest of this could rely on it in some respects if we solve that problem separately from this. But I think I would like to be able to do that without having to invest in all of the rest of this, of having a vetting claim agent that is doing all the rest of the stuff in this, right? So
Mhm.
let's talk about breaking that part off.
Mhm.
Like, arguably, when you get into what the rich call data claim agent is supposed to do,
Mhm.
I have trouble differentiating that from what we described as a third party like system in the baseline specifications for RCD.
Mhm.
There's an issuer, and the relying party trusts that issuer to have gathered the information that it has gathered or not. And like, you just trust it. The thing this adds is selective disclosure to that, right? That there could be rich data that is selectively disclosed.
Mhm.
I would also propose breaking that out into yet another thing.
Mhm.
You know, I think selective disclosure is a very complicated and very fraught thing
Mhm.
that like is going to be a much harder problem to solve than many of the other things that are in this.
Right.
The notion that like, you know, some entity, let's say it's an enterprise, a subject entity is in this instance, has something like your Vesper wallet that has a variety of these kinds of tokens. For example, a third party, we
Mhm.
vetted this brand, we vetted like that this can use this logo,
Right.
that this can use all this, like that you have like a wallet of those and that they're like different ones you can use in different situations.
Mhm.
I understand that a lot better than I understand selective disclosure. I understand the idea that if I have 15 logos,
Mhm.
that like I would get like 15 of those, you know,
Mhm.
third party vetted ish, you know, with an is in them
Right.
passports that I can just like tack on
Right.
to these things as I send out. And you know, you end up with two passports on the other side. You're basically ending up with two passports here anyway, because the
Right.
way selective disclosure works. So I don't see what value that adds above that. So again, looking at this from a much higher meta level,
Mhm.
I think there could be a framework, and you could still call it the Vesper framework,
Mhm.
right? That takes these in much more bite-sized chunks. We run down what exactly we think the security properties are that we're getting from each of these things, how they're aligned with the threat model of what we're trying to achieve here in STIR, and individually on their own merits put those things forward.
Yep.
I get most nervous again when I just hear that what KYC is going to do now. This a vetting claim agent could be vetting like anything about the identity of somebody who's behind a telephone number, like, because that's kind of what I'm hearing. And like that makes me, that is a scope creep that is so far beyond the original threat model of STIR. Then
I don't think
credit
the-
card numbers you're going to selectively disclose through this. That seems
No,
like a
I
very
don't-
obvious use case.
No, the intent was to be extensible more than it was to boil the ocean.
Yeah, but I think there is some ocean
Yes,
boiling is my perception here.
I'm open to that feedback.
Tear this into at least 3 parts, probably 4 is
I think,
my counsel.
yeah. I think there is some reasons to tie these things together, but taking a separable approach where they can work together. Yeah,
And still call it the Vesper framework. That's fine.
sure.
Like, and have this be part of like a comprehensive approach to this. But
Right.
it's just, I think these are all highly separable problems
Mhm.
and things that we know we need for other things that are separate.
Right.
And like, you know, again, I would for number 3 here need to understand really what this gets that you don't get from what is in the RCD document today for third-party issuers. Like, because I don't understand what that is, if it's except selective disclosure, which again, I think is a very problematic and fraud
Yeah.
thing to do.
I guess if you use ISS, maybe there's similar properties, but I think this ties it both for the directly signed by the issuer and, the whole transparency thing about that it was done, and that it can be vetted through transparency as well.
That applies though, because the issuer certificate is the thing that's actually signing the third party RCD with this, right? And it's all that stuff lives in the cert over in the CT realm. So of course that could have all the CT properties you're talking about, but that at least you've already put into a separate bucket. That's good.
Right.
Like that we're talking about now CT separately from this. I'm just saying, I think we need to talk about like all of these things, maybe not all, but most of them separately.
Sure. Yep. I get it.
Justin Somos. So I was thinking it more as a call by call instance. It's not in the certificate, right? It's in the passport.
Yeah.
So like call description was one thing where you might want to have the call go through, or call reason. Call reason is in the RCD, and you might not want to disclose that, but to the very end point, like anywhere along the way or something.
The enterprise?
The caller might describe a call reason that they want to keep private.
What
And
are
only
you
dis-
talking about? Sorry, you can please go on.
Oh, no, it's
That's an incoherent statement to me. The purpose of call reason is to tell the actual person you're calling what the reason is for the call.
right. But
you
they
may-
want to selectively disclose it. Okay, sorry.
Go on.
No, I
think-
was just looking for I was thinking, if you didn't want to have your call reason, you only want to disclose that out. You don't want it in CDRs
Or you might have multiple call reasons that are pre-vetted that you can disclose depending on which call scenario you're. So it's more of a, like today, folks are probably implementing it on a, I'm checking what the call reason is before it's sent out versus I have it in a selectively disclosable form that I can be the one sending it out. So the vetting is done and I have control to sign the call. Just like delegate certificates, just like everything else. It's pre-vetted. It's not the one that, it's not the issuer that has to be involved in the call flow to pass that in the call itself.
That's not true. That has nothing to do with what we're talking about though. Like may
Yeah,
I,
go ahead.
please? Yes.
Yeah.
We're talking about selective disclosure of this information, right? In the sense of when I'm placing a call, I'm going to send a call reason, and I don't want the person whose phone is ringing to see it. Is what you just said. And like
No,
so I understand you can have.
Yeah, he's just saying that you either choose to you choose to send it or you choose not to
Right.
send it,
So,
or you have multiple versions.
Yeah,
Isn't
you
that
choose to send
selective
it or you
disclosure?
choose not to send it is not what selective disclosure in the JOT sense means.
Correct.
Sure it is. I want to send
No, it's not what it means.
No, it means you need this third party that Ori was talking about, and like that this third party vets what you are and are not going to be able to share of the claims that appear in the JOT. Right?
yeah, the claim, the call reason is a claim and I decide whether or not I want to send it as part of the presentation that I'm making to the.
That's not what it means.
No, it's that. Yeah, so that is a perfectly sane and rational thing to do.
Right.
We have plenty of tools that do that already, right? In the
Mhm.
sense of we can issue you a delegate certificate that has, as you're well aware, JWT claim constraints in it that we can target to the reason field, right? That we have in RCD in the passport. Like we already have the power to do that and to make sure that that's vetted, and whoever it is, we trust the issuer of that certificate that you're authorized to use this. You could have a wallet or keychain, whatever you want to call it, of
Mhm.
certs that have different values for that are constrained to different things, right? Or we could have a list of it in a single cert.
Right.
There's a bunch of different ways that we can approach that. But selective disclosure is a mechanism that is attached to JOT that allows a mediating party to ascertain whether or not particular relying parties are authorized to have access to claims that are in the JOT. That's a very different thing from I'm deciding which of these certificates or which of these passports I'm going to send. And finally,
I thought I, as a holder, can decide what I want to disclose or not. I don't.
So at the beginning of this flow here, before Ori Steel, for the remote folks, at the beginning of the flow, you have some sort of you have Vesper wallet. The wallet is code for the user agent the holder is in possession of. It's the software, the user agent.
Right.
That the in this case, you're kind of using the language here. Subject. Often the subject and the holder are the same entity, and they're operating some software, we call it wallet software, when it holds their credentials. There's like a ton of other terminology that we're getting into here because we're talking about SDJOT.
Right.
But at this, at the top of all of this, there's this, this wallet software. You have keys that the wallet has an ability to use. The keys have to be obtained, and then they have to be sent over so that this, SDJWT thing can be bound to a key. So you can have proof of possession of the key.
Right.
So there's a key management part at the top where the holder sort of starts to use their key material, or they register their key material as part of an issuance process.
Right.
The issuer in your tokens, as I understand them, is always a certificate user of some kind. So the SDJOT is going to be signed by a certificate, but bound to a key. That key could be another certificate, or that key could be a JWK or something like that.
Right.
And then, there's other claims other than the key that are being bound in the selective disclosure format, and that could be disclosed by that wallet.
Right.
Software at the request of the user. But I don't understand at what point in your STIR protocol flows the user directs their wallet to present attributes with selective disclosure and key binding.
It would be like probably the typical example that it would exist today is a call center agent is getting ready to call somebody and decides on the purpose of the call and decides how they want to present themselves to the called party.
So the call center agent is not they're
the calling party. They're the one that is associated with the holder.
The call center agent has keys that identify the call center agent.
Yes.
That are bound to attributes that were signed by a certificate that identify the call center agent.
Or probably the brand that they're calling about. Things like that. Yeah.
Okay.
So it would be the Home Depot call agent, and I'm going to call because your order is ready to pick up. And so I'm going to disclose the order is ready to pick up, call reason, the logo that maybe displays the product that you have, like those types of things.
So I see there's more in the queue, so I'm going to take a step back. But just one other thing to be aware with this, these verifiable credential things. Who is the subject and what keys do they have and how do they use those keys in a protocol? Or you have to be very careful with that. And when I think about telephones, I mostly think about myself and my phone, and I would think of my mobile phone as being a wallet usually, because that's commonly how these credentials are used. Right. They're bound to HSM, isolated keys in the mobile phone, and then you're using your mobile phone to present these credentials as you travel through TSA or whatever. Right. So I would be extra careful to make it clear that that's not what you're talking about when you talk about them, because
correct,
it could be very confusing.
Yeah, and in general, I think we're as part of the whole stir shaken thing, we don't talk about rich call data associated with consumers quite yet. And who knows what the user interface would be to selectively disclose on a call, but it's not impossible to happen. But I think the primary use cases we're thinking about today are like call center branded calls, like that type of thing. Something where we care about establishing trust throughout the ecosystem.
Okay, Robert.
Rob Shtiva. Yeah, so actually Ori already brought up a bunch of these points that I wanted to make, but this is partly SDJOT is also about bringing the free party model, and the Vesper wallet, right, is really the holder. So it's actually not some other party making decisions about you, it's the holder. And the only other thing that, you know, in the previous conversation came out, indeed, like typically when we talk about Vesper wallet, we talk thinking about something, not Vesper wallet, digital wallets, something sitting on your phone. In here, it could be, you know, some service or the actual holder as in calling center, but it could be a third-party service that provides that digital Vesper wallet to that calling call center and or enterprise. So there is certain similarities, but there are some slight differences in there.
Yeah. And we're happy to clarify the language to make it more appropriate to the conventions that are there.
Go ahead, Eric.
Hi, we getting echo still, or are we good? Okay,
Yeah,
nobody
we hear
seemed-
you.
Great. Okay, we were getting echo earlier. So I guess I'm still trying to wrap my head around the sort of operational workflow for this selective disclosure case. So so you gave the example of Home Depot, right? So I have a certificate. So in a selective disclosure case, I have a certificate which has some number of call reasons that I might potentially be willing to call you for, like your order's ready to pick up, or you know, we're collecting some money from you, or something like that, right? And those are all under, those are all concealed, so that like, so that from the UC certificate you can't see any of them, right?
Not a certificate. It would be a SDJOT with a number of disclosable claims.
Fair enough, an SDJOT, great. And your thesis is that I have one of those that I use like all the time, and that then when I make, but then when I call you, I prove to you that it contains only the reason that I'm calling you for.
Each of the claims would be pre-vetted that it's valid for you to use, and you're just at the time of the call selecting which one you want to use.
Well, no, I
Yeah,
understand,
and that's actually, that's a property we get from the baseline STIR certs already. We already have like baked into these certs the ability to do JWT claim constraints that give you a list of like potential call reasons that are hashed. So I mean, they're potentially recoverable, but like, you know, so that's separate from what he's talking about here.
So you said that before, and you know, I would sort of probably make the claim that I think JWT claim constraints for that use case is probably not as convenient as using a selectively disclosable JOT.
Of introducing that third entity. Oh, okay. I'm sorry, but I'm sorry, Ecker. I interrupted.
Well, there's a third party entity when you're creating certificates also, but the issue of the certificate itself.
Sorry, Ecker, go on.
Yep.
Well, I'm just feeling very like confused, I think, in that like my understanding of an SDJOT is it has effectively has attestations to, has concealed but disclosable attestations to every piece of information which it's supposed to represent, right? So it has effectively a mechanism which can be used. Given the SDJOT, I, the holder of the JOT, can prove to you that it contains whatever the specific claim I wish to disclose, right?
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so in this case, it has, the SDJOT has the valid calling reasons that I might be calling for, and then when I make a specific call, I demonstrate that it has the specific reason I claim to be calling for. Right?
Yes.
Okay, good.
I think.
Okay, well, that seems like important for us to be on the same page about. And so as I understand it, and I understand the purpose for this is that I don't want you to disclose, I don't want to disclose to the receiving party that the certificate could also, so I'm calling you to say your item is ready for pickup, but I don't want to disclose to you that this certificate could also be used to say that you owe us a bunch of money?
Well, you wouldn't want to disclose multiple at one time, I guess, and maybe, you know,
Why
like
not?
whether it's one SDJOT or multiple SDJOTs in your wallet, like we can think about how those mechanisms work. But the idea is that you have pre-vetted a whole bunch of things. I mean, this is as John was saying, these are all mechanisms we've talked about. It's just in the form of something that's been validated so that you as the holder, you as the delegated party that is associated with a telephone number can initiate the call and not have to get
Right, but the
some
purpose of a
authoritative party
but
involved.
the purpose of a selective disclosure mechanism is to have a single credential, which represents multiple attributes, but
Mhm.
not to disclose all its attributes to the relying party. That is why it's
Correct.
selective disclosure. Otherwise, you should have regular disclosure. and
And that's
so
the intent.
and so what I'm trying to understand is what the motivating case for this is. And so to go back to your example, the motivating case would seem to be that I wish to call you and I say, and I wish you not to know that I could also use the certificate for some other purpose other than for some other call purpose other than what I'm claiming it's for. So I'm calling you to say your dishwasher's ready, but like I could also call you to say you owe Home Depot $50,000 and I don't want you to know that.
As long as you've been vetted to that's an authorized call reason that's appropriate for what you're saying.
No,
I don't know if that's what you're implying.
Quick
No, but I'm
interrupt.
trying to ask, why am I trying to conceal the information?
Quick interrupt. Frame the rest of your discussion to fit in about 5 minutes.
For the whole queue.
Maybe like so we've sort of honed in on call reason, but there's also sort of just the base use case of do I want to send calling name or logo in general? So I'm just creating the presentation depending on how I want to represent myself.
No, I
and what
understand, but
wanna
what I'm
display.
getting at is that the reason these kinds of things were invented, right, was to allow me to have like a credential, like there's my digital wallet, my digital driver's license, and I want to prove, and when I want to go buy booze, I want to prove we're 21, but I don't want to give you my address. That's what these things were invented for.
Right.
And so I'm trying to understand the motivating case for why I need one mega credential that I want to only disclose parts of it. And so the one I've got so far is your call reason, but I don't understand it.
So
Because I don't understand why it's a problem.
Also,
Can I cut in to answer that specific
Please.
question?
No, please.
Okay. The motivating case is we are really hung up on the selective disclosure, but the motivating case is actually three-party model. And it's not about us, anyone holding any kind of withholding information from others. It's ability. Selective disclosure aspect is ability for the holder to choose things that if there is a use case like that makes sense, this could be utilized. But at the end of the day, selective disclosure JAD can act purely as JAD itself, but in a third-party model, right? There is other signing aspects in here that are very important, because in Vesper Wallet, in this case, you may not be getting single SD JAD, right? You're going to be having multiple agents that issuing certain claims about you with and signing for this. Now, you as a holder have ability to present that to the verifier and say, yes, they were signed with those signatures. You can verify this, but I can also present you my signature and prove you that I am truly the authorized holder as well, right? So that is really the motivating factor behind this.
So one other quick point is that
We're down to 2 minutes and we have a question we need to ask. So wrap this up, please.
okay.
I'm just going to put this real simply. I don't think this does anything that ordinary certificates don't do. And we need to have a separate discussion. Especially short-lived certs are being issued. What is the difference between certs that you have on a key ring and your Vesper wallet?
Well,
My argument is
currently your certificate is tied to your telephone number provider, and you may want other issuers, other parties that you may want to sign other pieces of information because they're authoritative over it.
I think we are talking about information about telephone numbers in this working group. And like, if you're taking this to a scope where that is no longer salient, then I think we need
Well,
more than
we're
a
talking about
charter,
rich call data. We're talking about,
which is tied to a telephone number. And
but
indeed, that
your telephone service provider may not
Okay.
be the one that
I'm
wants
gonna-
to validate your.
do this. I'll do this again.
Who is validating rich call data today?
The ability to attest rich call data and to constrain it was built into the way that we built certificates with JWT claim constraints. It was built in fact, custom built for that specific use case. But of course, it applies to any other claim that could be in a passport, any other extension that could be in a passport. And so that is the main thing I think we need to resolve on the selective disclosure part, is how
Okay.
this differs from just having a key ring of certs that have like different JWT constraints in them.
Let's have that discussion.
Okay, so it's very clear to me that further discussion is needed before we could do an adoption call on Vesper. However, the question is, are we ready for an adoption call on CT? And I'd like to hear what people think. Is it, or are these two so tightly bound we shouldn't do either one yet?
I don't think we should bind them because I think they are different use cases. But that's also.
Any other thoughts? Go ahead.
So two things. First, I want to start a conversation around use cases that are motivating these two documents, and I want to progress that into a maybe a discussion around some charter revisions. I'll talk. We can take it to the list. We can have a conversation around it. My recommendation would be like, don't adopt these documents now, either of them. Like let's just start. Let's get clarity around the use cases and let's work towards some charter revisions. The other thing I came to the mic to say is that our update document. Where is it here?
Yeah, we talked about it at the beginning.
Yep. I think it's ready for last call. I sent you an email before this. I want to end on a happy note. I want to press the button.
No, I think it's ready.
Any objections?
No, we all think
I'm requesting last call.
Great.
I
All
hope
right.
this is an interesting discussion for everyone and we're interesting.
Discussion.
Perfect.
It's definitely an interesting discussion.
That-
I mean,
that's another happy note to end on.
yeah, the unhappy note is I would recommend requirements process to be blunt. And like if we go back, what is the threat model?
Well, I think that's what
yes.
Ori just told us to do, is discuss what
I-
requirements we
I
want
want
to
to see
solve in the
requirements
charter.
documents that say this is the problem we're trying to solve, and then we'll build the pieces that need to be built for this.
Okay,
But you're not wrong that there are things that need to be built for this.
we are out of time. Thank you all for a very interesting discussion. Enjoy dinner.